Resident Evil has some of the most iconic monsters in gaming history, but the real horror isn't the zombies or the mutants. It's what Umbrella did to ordinary people to create them. Today, I'm breaking down the most disturbing enemy lore in the entire franchise, starting with the mistake that showed the world exactly what the T-Virus was capable of becoming: liquor. Here's the thing about most Resident Evil enemies. They see you, they chase you, they kill you. Simple. The liquor doesn't even have that luxury. It can't see anything. Its eyes are completely gone, replaced by a brain that grew so large it burst through the skull and now sits exposed on top of its head like the world's worst helmet. These things are the result of zombies mutating further when exposed to the T-Virus over prolonged periods. Standard zombies that kept feeding and didn't just rot away eventually transformed into blind, skinless predators that navigate entirely through echolocation, which is, not ideal for anyone trying to sneak through a police station. The mutation happens specifically in low oxygen environment. Raccoon City's sewer system created the perfect conditions for the T-Virus to mutate standard zombies into something exponentially worse. Umbrella logged them as Type C specimens in their outbreak reports, which sounds clinical until you remember these things can impale you through a wall with their tongue. And about that tongue, the signature attack was actually inspired by medical documentation of violent internal organ expulsion. Someone at Capcom read about human bodies ejecting organs under extreme pressure and thought, yeah, let's make that a weapon. Cool. That's also a thing that happened, but the real genius is the exposed brain. It's simultaneously the most terrifying thing about them visually and their only meaningful weak point. Their claws deal 4 times standard zombie damage, so getting close is basically suicide. You need to shoot the one thing that makes them look like a nightmare. The design forces you into a horrible choice: aim carefully at the pulsing brain matter, or panic and waste ammo on a body that barely registers hits. The sensory deprivation angle changed how players physically move through the game. Running gets you killed. Every footstep becomes a death sentence. Resident Evil 2 turned movement itself into a horror mechanic, and the liquor is entirely what. But if you think a blind monster hunting you by sound is disturbing, wait until you meet the man who caused all of this, and then injected himself with something even worse. William Birkin. Most Resident Evil villains are monsters who chose power. William Birkin is a monster who chose survival, and that one distinction makes him the most tragic thing this franchise has ever produced. Here's the setup. Birkin spent years as Umbrella's chief G-Virus researcher, obsessively documenting every breakthrough in what would eventually become 127 pages of personal logs. The man was brilliant, paranoid, and completely consumed by his work. Then in 1998, Umbrella sent a commando team to steal his research. They shot him, left him for dead, and in his final moments of rational thought, he did the only thing a desperate scientist with a god complex would do. He injected himself with the G-Virus. That decision killed a city. What followed was a 5-stage transformation, and each stage is essentially a countdown clock of everything human about Birkin being stripped away. Stage 1, he's still recognizably William. Mutated, sure, but conscious. By stage 3, he's a hulking mass of exposed muscle and bone with zero capacity for speech. By stage 5, he's a massive blob of flesh and teeth, barely resembling anything that was ever human. But here's where the design gets genuinely brilliant. Each form progressively buries William's original body deeper inside the mutation. Like the creature is literally digesting the man who created it. His face gets absorbed. His limbs get repurposed. By the end, you're not fighting William Birkin. You're fighting what ate him from the inside out. I don't know what to tell you, that's just perfect visual storytelling. The real horror isn't physical, though. Birkin's logs document his own psychosis in real time. He watches himself losing coherence across pages of increasingly fragmented writing. He knows what's happening, he just can't stop it. And while he's mid-transformation, his daughter Sherry gets infected with the G-Virus too. His work didn't just destroy him, it reached forward and poisoned his own child. When his mutations finally breached the underground lab, they triggered Raccoon City's viral outbreak. One man's desperate survival instinct wiped out an entire city, not because he was evil, because he was scared. But if you think one man's desperate act unleashing a citywide plague is the worst Umbrella ever did, wait until you see what they engineered specifically to hunt you. Nemesis. Before Nemesis showed up, Resident Evil was about slow dread, creeping through hallways, conserving ammo, praying nothing was around the corner. Then 1999 hit and Capcom said, what if the thing around the corner followed you everywhere you went, forever? And also, it had a rocket launch. Here's the thing about Nemesis that separates it from every other tyrant in the franchise. This wasn't a monster that wandered into your path, it was programmed to find you. Specifically you. The thing used voice recognition and thermal tracking to hunt STARS members, meaning it could hear you and see your body heat through walls. It's 8 feet tall and carries a rocket launcher like a normal person carries a briefcase, not struggling with the weight, not bracing for recoil. just pointing and firing like Umbrella trained a bioweapon to use military hardware the way you'd use a TV remote, created by implanting the ENE alpha parasite into a T-103 Tyrant. Nemesis represented Umbrella's first successful merger of parasitic intelligence with a biological weapons platform. The parasite hijacked the host's nervous system, gave it tactical reasoning, problem-solving ability, and that relentless hunting drive. The AI pathfinding alone required 320 hours of development time, which makes sense when you realize this thing tracks you across 7 distinct attack phases throughout the game, growing more deformed and more aggressive with each encounter. It doesn't get weaker as you damage it, it gets angry. And that vocalization, that guttural stars that still lives rent-free in every RE fan's skull. The production team recorded an actor shouting through a gas mask, then slowed the audio down to 60% speed. Took 17 takes to nail that exact mechanical distortion. Somewhere out there, take number 6 probably just sounds like a guy having a bad day at the dentist, but if Nemesis represents the horror of being hunted by something built never to stop, the next entry goes back to where it all started. The first person Umbrella ever failed and never let die, Lisa Trevor. In 1967, a 14-year-old girl named Lisa Trevor was kidnapped along with her mother and brought to the Arklay research facility. She became Umbrella's first human test subject for the progenitor virus, Patient Zero, the original sin of every bioweapon that followed. Here's what that actually means. Over the next 30 years, Lisa underwent a relentless cascade of viral and biological experiments. Each one failed. Each one should have killed her. But her body kept regenerating, kept healing, kept refusing to let her die no matter how much she wanted it to. And she was aware the entire time. Her fractured diary entries reveal a mind trapped in permanent psychological torture. She spent 30 years desperately searching for her mother. When her mother died during experiments, Umbrella began cycling stand-in women through the facility, posing as her parents to keep Lisa calm and compliant. Lisa eventually convinced herself each one was an imposter. She killed them. She wore their faces over her own, which sounds like the worst kind of horror writing until you realize Umbrella orchestrated every second of it, deliberately feeding her grief to keep the experiments running. But here's the thing that makes Lisa more than just tragic. She survived. For 3 decades, she haunted the Spencer estate, mutating beyond recognition, and when players finally encountered her, she couldn't be killed. Not permanently. She'd get back up. She always got back up. The franchise's first truly unkillable enemy. Born from the simple fact that Umbrella couldn't even give her the mercy of death, one family destroyed to build an empire of monsters. But if Lisa represents Umbrella's first experiment gone wrong, wait until you see what happens when their failures start spreading. Crimson Head. Here's a fun lesson the Resident Evil remake taught millions of players back in 2002. If you're going to kill something, kill it properly, because half measures have consequences. And in the Spencer Mansion, those consequences run at you 3 times faster than the thing you thought you already dealt with. The standard zombie in Resident Evil is slow, manageable. You pump a few rounds into it, it drops, you step over the body and move on. But here's the thing, if you didn't destroy that corpse, if you just damaged it enough to make it fall, you've started a clock. After roughly 15 minutes of inactivity, the T-virus does something genuinely horrifying. It mutates the host into something worse. The Crimson Head is what happens when rage overrides viral control. That's not me being dramatic. It's Umbrella's own internal research. The virus essentially loses its grip on the host's nervous system, and what fills the gap is pure, undiluted aggression. The result is a zombie that moves at 300% increased speed, with fingernails that have been replaced by razor-sharp bone protrusions extending straight through the skin, which is, you know, not ideal. Only 7 of these things exist in the mansion scenario, 7, and every single one requires specific player actions to trigger. You have to leave a zombie corpse intact. You have to walk away. You have to come back late. The game is literally punishing you for conserving ammunition. It's a survival horror mechanic that says, oh, you thought you were being smart. Here's something faster than you that wants to peel your face off with bone claws. 7 enemy. That's all it took to fundamentally reshape how an entire genre handled resource management and player complacency. But if you think an upgraded zombie is bad, wait until you hear about a parasite that's been quietly controlling human civilizations for centuries before Umbrella even existed. Las Plagas. Every enemy in Resident Evil before 2005 had one thing in common. They were dead. Zombies, lickers, tyrants, all corpses running on viral fume. Las Plagas changed that. These hosts are alive, awake, screaming inside their own skulls while something else drives. And that's so much worse. The Plagas are ancient parasitic organisms discovered sealed beneath a rural Spanish castle. Buried so deep underground, the earth itself seemed to be trying to keep them contained. Lord Sadler's cult the Los Illuminados, dug them up deliberately. Biologically, they have nothing in common with the T-virus. Where Umbrella's pet project rewrites your entire cellular structure, the Plagas don't bother with your body at all. They want your brain. Specifically, they hijack the neural pathway, threading themselves through the host's nervous system until every voluntary action belongs to the parasite. You're still in there. You just can't do anything about it. The takeover is near total. Once a Plaga matures inside a host, independent thought is basically gone. You become a ganado, a hive-minded drone coordinated under dominant hosts like Sadler and Salazar. The parasite is injected as an egg, and by the time it's fully grown and attached to the spinal cord, you're nothing but a puppet with a heartbeat. One bad day, and you're gone forever. Here's where it gets genuinely unsettling. The reanimation mechanic, where a ganado drops dead and then gets back up with something horrible bursting from its neck, was inspired by real parasitic wasps. These wasps lay eggs inside caterpillars, chemically hijack the caterpillar's behavior to protect the larvae, and the host stays alive and functional right up until the larvae eat it from the inside out. That's not fiction. That's Tuesday in the Amazon rainforest. Later strains evolved airborne transmission capability, which is not ideal. Las Plagas didn't just introduce a new enemy type, it fundamentally redefined what Resident Evil could be. The franchise went from shoot the dead thing to shoot the person who's begging you to shoot them. That's a philosophical pivot most horror series never have the guts to make. But if you think a parasite that steals your mind is bad, wait until you meet the thing that simply refuses to die no matter what you throw at it. Regenerador. Resident Evil 4 has hundreds of enemies, ganados, zealots, military personnel, parasites bursting out of necks. You fight through all of them with shotgun, rifle, roundhouse kicks, and sheer aggression. The game trains you for 9 hours to be an unstoppable force, and then it puts you in a room with something you cannot kill. Here's the thing about Regenerador. There are only 4 of them in the entire game. 4, that's it. And yet, if you ask anyone who played RE4 what scared them most, they won't say Salazar, they won't say Krauser, they won't even say the final boss, they'll say the breathing. That horrible asthmatic rattling breath that tells you one of these things is nearby. The design philosophy is brutal in its simplicity. You shoot them, they fall apart, and then they just grow back. Limbs reforming, tissue knitting together in real time. Every bullet you fire is worthless unless you have the thermal scope equipped, because their weak points are internal Plaga parasites invisible to the naked eye. The game literally strips your competence away. You've been Leon Kennedy for hours. Now you're helpless. The development team obsessed over making the regeneration look viscerally wrong. The animation work on their limb regrowth alone required meticulous frame-by-frame crafting to sell the biological horror of watching flesh bubble and stretch back into shape. That's the kind of obsessive attention to craft that separates scary from, I need to pause the game and collect myself. And there's no trick to slowing them down. You can't outpace their healing through aggression or strategy. You either hit the parasites with the thermal scope, or you watch them knit themselves back together while they shamble toward, which is, not ideal. Their design draws from pure body horror tradition. The team wanted something that violated the player's sense of control, an enemy that punishes the exact combat instincts the game spent hours building. They looked at what made players feel powerful and then created something that made all of it useless. 4 encounters. Painstaking animation work for each grotesque regeneration cycle. Decades of nightmares for millions of players. Quality over quantity as a horror philosophy perfected. But if Regeneradors prove that less is more for body horror, the Baker family proved you can make something even more disturbing using nothing but mold and a swamp Margaret Baker. Most Resident Evil enemies happen fast. A bite, a mutation, then everything you were is gone. Margaret Baker lived through it different. She watched herself disappear over 3 agonizing years. That slow unraveling is what makes her one of the most disturbing creatures in the entire series. Before Eveline showed up on that tanker in 2014, Margaret was just a normal woman with a house in Louisiana and a regular life. Then the mold crept in, and unlike the usual infections, this one didn't rush. It took its time. 3 years of calcification. Bones turning into something that wasn't bone. Thoughts fading until she couldn't even hear her own mind anymore. By her final infested form, her body was overtaken by calcified mold. Massive hive-like growths burst from her torso, her limbs barely visible under layers of fungal matter. The design team made every detail look organic and grotesque at the same time, an absurd level of clarity for something you'd rather not see at all. Here's where it gets truly unsettling. Her signature attack? She spawns swarms of mutated spiders and centipedes from her own body, creatures she controls through the mold. She's a walking nest. Her flesh isn't hers anymore, it's theirs. Capcom literally made a boss fight about your own body becoming an ecosystem for parasites. Cool. That's also a thing that happened. Margaret appears in 3 phases during Resident Evil 7, each showing more of the person dissolving inside her. Phase 1, she's aggressive but still human. Phase 3, she's pure infection. But here's the kicker. Easter eggs around the Baker estate hint Margaret might have tried to protect Mia early on. Capcom never confirmed it, which somehow makes it worse. She fought it and still lost. Margaret embodies Resident Evil's core horror. Not global bioterror, not big action, but a person trapped in a house losing herself day by day. But if slow decay gets under your skin, wait until you meet someone who turned trauma into a reality-bending nightmare. Donna Beneviento. Every enemy on this list has claws or teeth or some grotesque mutation you can point at and say, yeah, that's the monster. Donna Beneviento has a doll. That's it. Porcelain doll named Angie and a house full of flowers. And she's the scariest thing Resident Evil has ever produced. Here's the thing, Donna didn't choose any of them. She was a reclusive woman who suffered from severe mental illness, isolated in her estate after losing her family. Then Miranda found her. Miranda saw a broken mind and perfect raw material. She implanted the Kadu parasite into Donna's system, not to give her claws or tentacles, but to weaponize her grief, to turn her fractured psyche into a bioweapon. Her ability manifests through hallucinogenic plan. She doesn't fight you with her body, she fights you with yours. The first phase of her encounter takes place inside a manifestation of pure psychological horror. No weapons in your inventory, no herbs help. You're navigating the architecture of someone's nightmare, and the game strips every tool you've relied on for 25 years of Resident Evil and says, good luck. Then comes the final confrontation with Angie, porcelain doll skittering between duplicates, and you have to put her down with your gun while she laughs. The doll represents the child Donna could never move past. Every time you stab that scissors into porcelain, you're watching a piece of someone's stolen innocence break apart. The sound design alone on those hits is sickening. They wanted each one to land different, each one to hurt different. And this is where the franchise debate gets genuinely philosophical. Is Donna a monster? She killed people. She tormented Ethan with visions of his dead daughter. But she was also a victim conditioned into becoming a weapon by someone who exploited her mental illness. The community still fights about this, but maybe that's the point. After 25 years of increasingly elaborate body horror, Resident Evil arrived at something far more disturbing than any exposed muscle or mutated jaw. The scariest enemy in the franchise has no visible mutation at all, just a broken mind, a doll, and the quiet certainty that sometimes the real horror is what someone else did to you before you ever became the thing in the dark. If you enjoyed this video and want to see more, click the video on the screen now.